The chandeliers were too bright for a Thursday, like 1,000 witnesses waiting for something to confess. Their light slid over mahogany and glass, turned the bottles behind the bar into little stained glass saints lined up in judgment. My heels clicked against the parquet 3 steps, then stopped. In the mirror between the premium vodka and single malt scotch, I caught the easy slouch, the laugh that used to feel like sunlight before it learned to cut. Charles. The watch I'd co-signed for caught the light as he raised his whiskey glass. Same trim beard, same confident sprawl, same smile that made promises he never kept. My throat tightened. 3 months rebuilding my credit, my confidence, my sense of up and down, and here he was in the one place I'd chosen to feel like myself again. I'd left the clinic early, told myself I deserved 1 drink in a crimson dress I'd bought on sale but never worn. Borrowed courage, I'd thought when I zipped it up. Now it felt like a costume for a play where I'd forgotten my lines. Leave. The thought was clear and sensible. My hand tightened on my clutch. Then I saw movement through the crowd, not frantic, not loud, but absolute. A man in a black suit guided a woman through a slow turn, his hand at the exact point on her spine where control meets trust. He didn't smile, didn't perform. He simply occupied space the way gravity does, inevitable and inarguable. Ink curled up from his collar, dark lines against tan skin, and when he pivoted his partner away from a stumbling couple, 2 other men in sharp suits repositioned near the bar's edge like pieces on a chessboard. My feet moved before my brain approved the plan. "Excuse me." My voice came out steadier than I felt. He turned. His eyes were dark, measuring not in the leering way I'd learned to deflect, but the way someone appraises architecture, calculating load-bearing walls and weak points. "Please, dance with me." The words rushed out. "My ex is watching from the bar and I..." Heat flooded my face. "God, I'm sorry. That was completely inappropriate. I don't even know." I know his type. His voice was low, the kind of quiet that makes you lean in rather than forces you back. He glanced once toward the mirror, toward Charles's reflection, then back to me. Something cold passed through his expression, there and gone like a cloud across the moon. He extended his hand. His palm was warm when I took it, rougher than I expected. Not a banker's hand, not a lawyer's either. The silver watch at his wrist was heavy, old-world elegant, the kind you inherit rather than buy. "1 dance," he said softly, and though it sounded like an offer, it felt like a verdict. "Make him forget he ever had the privilege of knowing you." I should have asked his name, should have questioned why 2 men in matching dark suits tracked our movement as he led me onto the floor. Should have registered the way the crowd parted, not pushed, just gave way as his hand settled at the small of my back. But Charles's laugh cut through the music, sharp and familiar and designed to make me feel small. I placed my hand on the stranger's shoulder. His jacket was expensive, the kind of weave that doesn't wrinkle. Beneath it, I could feel the solid weight of muscle, and something else, a ridge along his ribs that might have been a scar, or might have been something I shouldn't be noticing at all. "Kayla," I said, needing to anchor this moment in something real. He turned me, slow and deliberate, shielding my sightline from the bar. "Gustavo." The music folded around us, something low and instrumental, strings and shadow. He moved like he knew exactly where every other body in the room would be 3 seconds before they got there. Not dancing so much as conducting. When I stumbled slightly on a turn, his hand tightened just enough to steady me, then released the pressure the instant I found my balance. "Your ex," Gustavo said, his voice barely above a murmur, "is watching." Good. The word surprised me. So did the fact that I meant it. His mouth curved, not quite a smile, something sharper. Better than good. He's realizing he lost something he'll never get back. I wanted to say something clever, something that matched the smoothness of this moment. Instead, I glanced toward the bar. Charles had straightened from his slouch. His expression wasn't smug anymore. It was calculating, uncertain. When I looked back at Gustavo, I caught the tail end of a gesture, barely a tilt of his head, but one of the suited men near the bar shifted position, placing himself directly in Charles's sightline. "Security?" I asked, though my pulse kicked up a warning I couldn't quite name. "Something like that." Gustavo's hand at my back was firm, guiding me through another slow rotation. "You're safe here." The certainty in his voice should have been reassuring. Instead, it felt like a door closing on a room I hadn't meant to enter. "I don't usually do this," I said. "Ambush strangers for fake dance partners. I don't usually say yes." He met my eyes, and for a moment the calculation dropped away, replaced by something that might have been curiosity. "But you asked like someone who'd forgotten she was allowed to ask for things." The observation landed too close to true. I opened my mouth to deflect, to laugh it off. Kayla. Charles's voice cut across the floor, loud enough to turn heads. My breath caught. Gustavo's hand didn't move from my back, but somehow the entire room felt different. Tighter. We need to talk. Charles was 3 feet away now, his expression hovering between annoyance and something uglier. Now. I started to step back. Gustavo's hand shifted, not gripping, not trapping, just there. A question pressed against my spine in the language of touch. What do you want? The lady's dancing. Gustavo's voice was quiet, absolute. Charles's gaze flicked to him, then to the two men who'd somehow repositioned closer without seeming to move at all. Something in Charles's swagger guttered like a candle in wind. This doesn't concern you, Charles tried, but his voice had lost its edge. Gustavo didn't respond. He simply turned me, slow and deliberate, putting his body between Charles and me. The music swelled. Someone near the bar murmured something low. Charles took a step back. Then another. Who the hell? I started. Later. Gustavo's thumb traced a small circle against my spine, a gesture so casual it took a moment to register as deliberate. First, we finished the dance. The music changed something slower, strings heavy with intention, but Charles didn't move. He stood at the edge of the dance floor, jaw tight, hands flexing at his sides like he was working through calculations that weren't adding up. Kayla. My name again, sharper this time. Don't make this difficult. Before I could respond, his hand shot out and closed around my wrist. Not hard enough to hurt, but firm enough to pull. The same grip he'd used 100 times before guiding me out of restaurants when I'd embarrassed him, steering me away from friends he'd decided I shouldn't see. Gustavo moved. Not fast, not violent, just a fractional pivot that put his shoulder between Charles and me, his hand covering Charles's grip without squeezing. The lady's dancing. His voice was lower now, stripped of any social veneer. Not a suggestion, a fact being delivered. Charles's fingers loosened. I pulled my wrist free, and the absence of that familiar pressure felt like cold air on a burn. You don't know what you're stepping into, Charles said. But he was looking at Gustavo now, not me, and something in his expression had shifted from annoyance to assessment. The two men in dark suits had drifted closer. One stood near the bar's exit. The other had positioned himself behind Charles, not crowding, just present a living reminder that the room had geometry Charles hadn't accounted for. Charles's gaze darted between them, then back to Gustavo. His throat worked. This isn't over. Yes, Gustavo said quietly. It is. Charles opened his mouth, thought better of it, and turned. His retreat wasn't quite a run, but it wasn't a walk either. The crowd swallowed him, and I realized I'd been holding my breath. Come. Gustavo's hand returned to the small of my back, and this time I registered the care in it, pressure distributed across his palm, not fingertips. Guiding, not controlling. You need to sit. He led me to a booth near the back, mahogany dark and half hidden by a velvet curtain. The leather was butter soft under my legs. My hands were shaking. A waiter appeared almost instantly, too quickly to have been summoned. Signor. He caught himself, glanced at me, corrected smoothly. Sir. The usual? Water for the lady, mineral, not tap, and something stronger if she wants it. Just water, I managed. The waiter vanished. Gustavo slid into the booth across from me, not beside me, giving me space I hadn't asked for but desperately needed. In the low light, the ink at his collar was more visible. Not random designs, but something deliberate. Symbols or script, maybe. Lineage, not decoration. You didn't have to do that, I said. Yes, I did. He said it like correcting a minor error in arithmetic. Why? His gaze held mine. Because men like him rely on women like you not having an alternative. The words landed with uncomfortable accuracy. I looked down at my wrist, where Charles's grip had left faint red marks already fading. How many times had I let him steer me? How many times had I mistaken control for care? The water arrived in a glass that caught the light. Real crystal this time. I drank half of it before I trusted my voice. I have a job interview tomorrow, I said, needing to fill the silence with something normal. Nonprofit gallery, associate curator position. It's not much, but it's yours, not a question. It will be, maybe, if the background check doesn't. I trailed off, the old shame curling in my chest. Gustavo leaned forward slightly, not crowding, just closing the distance to something more conversational. Doesn't what? Nothing. Money stress. Everyone has it. I forced a smile that felt like plastic. I'm fine. Kayla. The way he said my name made it a gentle refusal. I've built a career on reading people. You're many things right now. Fine isn't one of them. I should have deflected, should have changed the subject. Instead, I found myself saying, Charles convinced me to co-sign a loan for his startup. $50,000 I didn't have. He promised 6 months, then vanished with the money and filed for divorce. The loan's still in my name. He keeps threatening legal action if I don't sign a waiver releasing him from liability. The words came out flat, clinical, like I was describing someone else's disaster. Gustavo's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes went very still. He's using debt as leverage. He's using it as a leash. The admission tasted bitter. If I don't comply, he'll let it default. My credit tanks, background checks flag it, and I lose any chance at positions like tomorrow's interview. When does he want this waiver signed? He's been texting. Says he'll take care of everything if I just make it easy on both of us. I laughed, sharp and humorless. As if caging someone is a favor. Gustavo's jaw tightened fractionally. When he spoke, his voice was careful, each word measured. May I? He gestured toward the space beside me on the bench. He blinked. You're asking permission to sit closer? Yes. Something in my chest loosened. Yes. He moved around the table, settled beside me with maybe 6 inches of space between us. Close enough to feel his presence, far enough that I could breathe. Debt shouldn't be a cage, he said quietly. Tell that to Charles. His phone buzzed against the table. He glanced at the screen, and something shifted in his posture, not tension exactly, but focus sharpening to a point. I need to take this. He stood, buttoned his jacket. 2 minutes. One of the suited men appeared at the edge of the booth as Gustavo stepped away, sliding into a position that was somehow both protective and unobtrusive. He won't be long, the man said. His voice was polite, accent thicker than Gustavo's. Signor Bellucci doesn't like to keep people waiting. Bellucci. The name hung in the air between us like smoke, heavy with implications I couldn't quite parse. I'd heard it before where? News? Gossip? The gallery director's nervous laugh when someone important sent regrets to an opening? The man's expression remained neutral, but I caught the moment he realized what he'd said, what he'd revealed. Just sir is fine, he corrected quietly. But the name was already burned into my memory, carrying weight I didn't yet understand. Gustavo returned 3 minutes later, not 2. The phone was gone, but something in his bearing had changed, not softened, sharpened. When he reached for his water glass, his jacket shifted, and I caught the outline beneath his left ribs. Angular, deliberate, not a phone. He noticed me noticing. Didn't apologize, didn't explain. Just met my eyes with the same measuring look he'd given Charles, waiting to see what I'd do with the information. I should have been afraid. Should have made excuses and called a car. Instead, I found myself cataloging the contradictions. The man who asked permission to sit closer carried something designed to end conversations permanently. The hands that had guided me so carefully through a dance were calloused in places that suggested violence as vocabulary. Dance with me again, he said. Not a question this time, but still an offer. The distinction mattered. Why? Because the first one was for him. Gustavo gestured vaguely toward where Charles had retreated. The second should be for you. No audience this time. The dance floor had thinned. Only a handful of couples remained, swaying to something instrumental and unhurried. He led me back to the parquet, and this time when his hand settled at my back, I felt the full weight of his attention, not scanning the room, not monitoring threats, just present. He kept 6 inches between us, proper, almost formal. I was the one who closed the distance. His hand tightened fractionally at my waist, acknowledgement and acceptance. We moved through 2 full rotations before he spoke. The loan, he said. How much time do you have? Before Charles forces my hand? Days, maybe. He's been escalating. I watched a couple spin past us, young and laughing, unburdened by debt or exes with leverage. He knows the interview is tomorrow. He'll use it. Then we don't give him time to use it. We? The word came out sharper than intended. Gustavo's expression didn't change. You don't have to accept my help, but you asked me to dance, which means you understood, on some level, that I could shift the geometry of your situation. I asked you to make Charles uncomfortable for 3 minutes. And now you're deciding if you want more than 3 minutes. His thumb traced a small circle against my spine, the same gesture from before, deliberate and careful. I don't offer help lightly, Kayla. But when I do, I finish what I start. My phone buzzed in my clutch. I ignored it. It buzzed again, insistent. You should check that, Gustavo said quietly. I pulled it out one-handed, keeping the other on his shoulder. The texts were from an unknown number, but I knew the cadence. You looked good out there. New dress? Hope you didn't put it on credit. We should talk soon. Before things get complicated. You know what's on file in your name. Lawyers cost more than you can afford right now. Let's settle this like adults. My hand tightened on the phone. Gustavo read the shift in my posture, glanced at the screen without asking. Worst case, I said, my voice flat. The debt defaults during the background check. Flags go up. Interview goes sideways. I spend the next 5 years rebuilding credit and explaining gaps in my employment history. Then we remove worst cases. He said it like discussing weather. Simple. Inevitable. You can't just... I stopped, because the look in his eyes suggested he absolutely could, and had, and would again. I don't make problems disappear, Kayla. I make consequences arrive on schedule. His hand at my back was steady. The question is whether you want those consequences aimed at Charles or left to chance. The song ended. Another began immediately, seamless. Gustavo kept dancing, waiting for my answer. I want him to stop, I said finally. I want my name back, my credit, my life without his shadow in it. Then you'll have it. Not I'll try, or I'll see what I can do. Just certainty, delivered in a voice that made certainty sound like gravity. We finished the dance in silence. When he walked me back to collect my clutch, I caught the bartender's greeting, barely a murmur, but clear enough. Buonasera, signor Bellucci. Bellucci. There it was again, attached to a small nod of deference, the kind reserved for men who don't ask for respect because it arrives ahead of them. Gustavo handed me into a rideshare himself, checked the driver's credentials with a glance at the license plate, then stepped back. Tomorrow, he said through the open window. After your interview, text me. I don't have your... My phone chimed. A new contact. Gustavo. No last name, just a number. The car pulled away from the curb, and I watched the Bellagio house recede through the rear window. Halfway down the block, I noticed the black sedan. Not following exactly, matching our speed, keeping distance. When we turned, it turned. When we stopped at a light, it stopped 3 cars back. The driver didn't seem to notice, or maybe he did, and knew better than to comment. By the time I reached my apartment, the sedan was gone. But the certainty remained, pressed against my spine like Gustavo's palm. I wasn't walking through this city unguarded anymore. Morning came sharp and early, sunlight cutting through my apartment's thin curtains like an accusation. I'd slept in fragments, my mind cycling through the weight of Gustavo's hand at my back, the name Bellucci murmured with deference, and Charles's texts glowing phosphorescent behind my eyelids. You know what's on file in your name. At the clinic, I made coffee in the break room and tried to focus on the mundane patient files, supply orders, the broken copier that everyone ignored. My coworker Nina arrived at 8:30, already complaining about traffic, and stopped mid-sentence when she spotted the spread on the conference table. Did you order breakfast? She lifted a pastry box lid, croissants, fruit, expensive, looking danishes arranged like art. This is from Marcello's. They don't deliver unless you're... I didn't order it. I checked for a card, a receipt, anything. Nothing, just quality and silence. Nina bit into a croissant and moaned. Secret admirer with taste. I'm jealous. I thought about calloused palms and ink curling from starched collars. Not an admirer. Something else entirely. By 10, I'd changed into the charcoal sheath dress I'd steamed 3 times, memorized talking points about community engagement and accessible curation, and checked my credit report twice. The loan sat there like a tumor. $50,000, co-signed, delinquent notices filed. My phone rang. Blocked number. I almost didn't answer. Kayla. Charles's voice was smooth, practiced. The tone he used when he wanted something and knew exactly how to ask. I think we got off on the wrong foot last night. That guy you were with. What do you want, Charles? To help. The loan's a mess. I know that. Sign the release and I'll handle the creditors. Clean slate for both of us. The release that puts all liability on me? A pausa. Then, quieter, edged with something harder. Sign it, or the loan breathes again. Defaults go public. Background checks flag it. That gallery job you're interviewing for? He let the threat hang. You know how this works, Kayla. I tried to do this the easy way. He disconnected before I could respond. My hand shook as I set the phone down. Nina glanced over, concerned, but I waved her off and headed to the restroom. Splashed cold water on my face. Stared at the woman in the mirror, the same woman who'd let Charles guide her out of rooms, away from friends, into a corner where his voice was the only one that mattered. Not anymore. Across town, Charles's day was unraveling in ways he didn't yet understand. The banker who'd approved the loan, the one who'd bypassed standard verification because Charles bought him scotch and promised referrals, received a call from compliance, questions about documentation, irregularities in the approval process. He recused himself by noon, citing potential conflicts of interest. The investor Charles had been courting for his next venture texted regrets. Need to review fund allocations. Let's reconnect next quarter. His favorite club, the one with the rooftop bar where he closed deals and impressed dates, declined his reservation. No explanation, just fully booked. Apologies. Doors were closing, quietly, methodically, without announcement. Charles would notice by evening. By then, it would be too late to stop. Gustavo texted at 1. Coffee? Public place. Your choice. I picked a cafe 3 blocks from the gallery, all exposed brick and mid-afternoon light. He was already there when I arrived, seated at a corner table with sightlines to both exits. The black suit had been replaced with charcoal gray, but the effect was the same authority that didn't announce itself, just was. He stood when I approached, pulled out my chair, sat only after I did. How was the breakfast? He asked. You didn't have to do that. I don't do things I don't want to do. He sipped espresso from a cup the size of a thimble. How's the interview prep? Complicated. I wrapped both hands around my latte. Charles called, threatened to let the loan default if I don't sign his waiver. Gustavo's expression didn't shift, but something behind his eyes went very cold. And you said? I hung up. I met his gaze. Then I looked you up. Gustavo Bellucci. Articles about alleged ties and unconfirmed reports. A lot of questions no one seems willing to answer directly. And yet you're here, because I have a question of my own. I leaned forward slightly. What do you do with men who use debt to cage women? He set down his cup with precision. I cut cages. How? Systems. Pressure points. Consequences delivered through channels they thought they controlled. His gaze held mine. Charles built his leverage on paperwork and intimidation. Both can be dismantled. The question is whether you want me to dismantle them, or if you want to try another way first. I hadn't expected the choice. Men like Charles didn't offer choices. They issued ultimatums and waited for compliance. I want to fight it legally first, I said slowly. On paper. The right way. Gustavo nodded once. Then we start there. He pulled out his phone, typed briefly, then showed me a contact. Compliance attorney. She specializes in fraudulent inducement and co-signer liability. Former prosecutor. Tell her I sent you. And if the legal route doesn't work? His smile was sharp and humorless. Then we discuss alternatives. My phone camed. Email notification. Subject. Interview follow. Up McDaniel Kayla. My heart kicked against my ribs. I opened it with fingers that had gone numb. Dear Miss McDaniel, thank you for your time today. We were impressed with your presentation and vision for community-engaged curation. We are pleased to extend conditional approval for the associate curator position, pending standard background and credit verification. Conditional. Pending. The cage was still locked. Charles still held the key. I looked up at Gustavo. He'd already read the shift in my expression. Now we move, he said quietly. The attorney's office smelled like leather and old paper, the kind of place where words carried weight measured in precedent and consequence. Elena Russo sat across from us, reading glasses perched on her nose, flipping through the loan documents I'd brought with shaking hands. Fraudulent inducement, she said after the 3rd page. Verbal promises documented nowhere. Cosigner protections waived in language designed to confuse. She looked up at me, then at Gustavo. This is predatory by design. Can we break it? I asked. We can do better than break it. She pulled out a legal pad, began sketching an outline. We can turn it into a weapon. Over the next hour, Elena drafted a counter-release that read less like a legal document and more like a surgical instrument. Every clause was a blade. Full removal of my liability, documented proof of loan cancellation, transfer of obligation back to Charles as primary borrower. Then the killing stroke, a reference to the banker's kickback buried in an appendix, and an admission of fraud letter held in escrow, triggered automatically if Charles attempted any future legal action against me. He signs this, Elena said. Or the fraud documentation goes to his creditors, his investors, and the state bar if he ever tries practicing law again. He's not a lawyer, I said. No, but he wants to be. She smiled thinly. I checked. He's been taking the LSAT prep course for 2 years. Moral character review is required for bar admission. Fraud conviction makes that difficult. Gustavo leaned back in his chair, silent throughout, but I caught the slight curve at the corner of his mouth. Not quite approval. Recognition. How long to finalize? He asked. 70, 2 hours. Notarized, sealed, ready for countersignature. Elena looked at me. You'll need a witness when Charles signs. Someone he can't intimidate. I'll witness, Gustavo said. Elena's gaze flicked between us. Reading subtext I wasn't sure I wanted written yet. That works. We left the office as afternoon bled into evening, the sky over the city going copper and rose. Gustavo walked beside me, not ahead, matching my pace with the same precision he'd used on the dance floor. Coffee? He asked. Or something stronger? Just walk. I need to think. We walked. 5 blocks, then 10. He didn't fill the silence with reassurances or strategy, just stayed present, a solid line beside me while my mind turned over every angle Charles might exploit. Say it, Gustavo said finally. Say what? Whatever you've been practicing in your head. The words you think you need permission to speak. I stopped walking, turned to face him under the awning of a closed bookstore. No. He waited. No, I won't sign your waiver. No, I won't take your calls. No, you don't get to use my name as collateral anymore. The words tumbled out, gaining strength. No apology, no explanation, just no. Good, Gustavo said quietly. Again. No. Mean it. I do mean it. Heat rose in my chest, not anger, something fiercer. I'm done being small. Done letting him rewrite history so he's the reasonable one and I'm the difficult ex who won't just move on. Gustavo's expression didn't change, but something in his posture eased fractionally. You're learning. Learning what? That power isn't what people grant you. It's what you refuse to surrender. Over the next 3 days, Gustavo became a rhythm I didn't realize I was sinking to. He learned I ate lunch at 1:30, always at my desk, usually forgetting until my hands shook. A bag from the Italian place down the street appeared on day 2. No note, just carbonara and breadsticks, still warm. He learned I shut down around 8 at night, my responses going monosyllabic when exhaustion hit. His text stopped at 7:55 without me asking. He learned I hated phone calls before coffee. Texts only until 9 a.m. appeared as an unspoken rule. On day 3, Elena called. Documents are ready. We just need your signature and a witness. Gustavo met me at the attorney's office. He'd rolled his shirt sleeves to the elbow, and when he reached across the conference table to hand me a pen, I saw the tattoo clearly for the first time. Not random ink, a family crest, intricate and deliberate, wrapping from his wrist to the base of his thumb. Lines that meant lineage, legacy, the kind of mark you inherited, not chose. Old family? I asked. Very. He positioned the document in front of me. Your signature first, then mine as witness. I signed. My hand didn't shake. Gustavo signed beneath, his handwriting severe and elegant. Then he looked up, holding my gaze. You will sign this on your terms, with my pen. He doesn't get to dictate the when or how anymore. Not I'll fix it. Not let me handle this. You will. The distinction cracked something open in my chest. That night, my phone lit up. Unknown number, but I knew. Charles. Heard you've been busy. Lawyers now? That's cute. Wednesday, 2 p.m., Riverside Hotel Conference Room B. Bring your paperwork and your mafia boyfriend if it makes you brave. Let's finish this. I screenshotted it, sent it to Gustavo. His response came in seconds. Good. He's rattled. That makes him sloppy. Then, after a pause, I'll be there. But you're the one who walks in first. You're the one who slides the document across the table. I'm just the man holding the pen. I read it twice, 3 times. Not rescue. Partnership. I typed back, Wednesday, 2 p.m. I'll be ready. His reply was a single word. Yes. Outside my window, the city hummed with traffic and distant sirens. Somewhere out there, Charles was getting phone calls that didn't make sense, watching doors close without explanation, realizing the geometry of his power had shifted in ways he couldn't trace back to a source. Wednesday was 2 days away. I spent them practicing one word, over and over, until it felt like bone. No. The Riverside Hotel conference room smelled like industrial carpet cleaner and ambition. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the water, light bouncing off glass towers across the river, neutral territory. Anonymous, the kind of place where deals closed and lives changed direction between pours of complimentary coffee. I arrived first, set my folder on the table with hands that had stopped shaking somewhere around the lobby. Elena had wanted to attend, but I'd said no. This needed to be clean. Just Charles, me, and the document that would cut me free. Gustavo arrived 3 minutes later. Black suit, no tie, the ink at his collar just visible. He took a seat 2 chairs down from me, close enough to matter, far enough to make it clear this was my table, not his. "You good?" he asked quietly. "Yes." He nodded once, pulled out his phone, began scrolling with the air of a man who had all the time in the world and none of the urgency. Charles walked in at 2:07, deliberately late, wearing the confident smile I used to think meant everything was fine. Tailored navy suit, the watch, hair styled with the kind of product that held through board meetings and lies. "Kayla." He said my name like we were old friends meeting for drinks. "You look good. That dress new?" I didn't answer. He set his leather folder on the table, glanced at Gustavo with the expression men use when sizing up competition they don't take seriously. "Your friend joining us?" "He's my witness," I said. "Witness," Charles chuckled, opening his folder to reveal a sheaf of papers clipped with legal precision. "This isn't a trial, Kay. It's a conversation between adults who made a mistake and want to move forward. Then let's move forward." I slid my document across the table. Charles picked it up, still smiling, and started reading. The smile lasted through the first paragraph, faltered on the second, died entirely by page 3. "What is this?" His voice had lost its casual warmth. "Full liability removal, documented loan cancellation, and transfer of obligation back to you as primary borrower." I kept my tone even, factual, the way Elena had taught me. Sign, and we're done. Both free. "This isn't..." He flipped to the appendix, and I watched his face drain of color. "You can't reference the bank approval. That was a private, fraudulent inducement." I leaned forward slightly. "Verbal promises documented nowhere. Co-signer protections waived in language designed to confuse. Your words, Charles. Your choices." His jaw tightened. "You think you can threaten me with some legal fiction your..." He glanced at Gustavo. "Friend probably paid for?" Gustavo didn't look up from his phone. Just kept scrolling, radiating the kind of bored patience that made threats unnecessary. Charles's phone buzzed. Then again. He tried to ignore it. The third buzz made him look. I watched his face as he read. Watched confusion shift to something sharper. He opened his email. "Read again." His free hand curled into a fist against the table. "Problem?" I asked. "The investor." He stopped. Scrolled. Another email loaded. "The bank's flagging the loan for audit review. They can't just..." "They can." I kept my voice level. "When documentation raises questions about approval processes and conflicts of interest." His gaze snapped to me, then to Gustavo, who still hadn't spoken. "You did this." Gustavo looked up, met Charles's eyes with the flat calm of a man who didn't need to explain himself. "I verified facts. Doors close when facts don't support confidence. This is illegal." "What's illegal?" Elena's voice came from the doorway I hadn't heard her arrive. "Is fraudulent inducement of co-signers. What's illegal is kickback arrangements with loan officers. What's actionable is threatening legal consequences to coerce signature on liability waivers." She set her briefcase down with a crisp snap. "Everything Mr. Bellucci referenced exists in documented form. Public record, compliance filings, standard audit triggers. If you'd like to discuss legality, we can invite the State Banking Commission to join us." Charles's hand, the one holding the document, began to shake. "The escrow clause," I said, pointing to page 5. "If you attempt any future legal action against me, the fraud documentation goes to your creditors, potential investors, and the LSAC Moral Character Review Board." "You looked into..." He stopped, exhaled hard through his nose. "You planned this." I protected myself. I corrected. "There's a difference." For 10 seconds, the only sound was the hum of the air conditioning and the distant murmur of the river below. Charles read the escrow clause again, then again, as if repetition might change the words. Finally, he reached for a pen. The signature was jagged, angry. He didn't date it. Elena did, then notarized with practiced efficiency. Gustavo signed as witness, his handwriting controlled and precise next to Charles's scrawl. My phone chimed. Transfer confirmation. Loan obligation. Removed from credit file. Calum Z. Daniel. Charles stood abruptly, chair scraping. You have no idea what you've... Yes, Gustavo said quietly, still seated. She does. Charles grabbed his folder, now empty of leverage, and walked out. The door closed with a soft click that sounded like an ending. Elena collected the signed documents, slipped them into her briefcase. Congratulations, Miss McDaniel. You're free. My hands were shaking now, adrenaline flooding in after the fact. Elena left with a nod. Gustavo stood, buttoned his jacket, and waited. My phone chimed again. Subject: Position confirmation. Associate Curator. Dear Miss McDaniel, we are pleased to confirm your appointment as Associate Curator, effective immediately. Background verification has been completed successfully. I read it 3 times. Then the tears came. Not sad, not relieved. Something bigger than both. I laughed through them, a sound halfway between joy and disbelief. Gustavo watched, unreadable, until I looked up. Dinner, he said, to mark a beginning. Not celebration, not congratulations. A beginning. Yes, I managed. He offered his hand. I took it. The restaurant didn't advertise. No sign on the door, just a brass number and a man in a dark suit who nodded at Gustavo like he'd been expected for hours. We were led through the main dining room white tablecloths, murmured conversations, the clink of crystal, and up a narrow staircase to a private room with windows overlooking the city. Soft music played from hidden speakers, something classical, strings and piano. The table was set for 2, candles already lit, wine breathing in a decanter I suspected cost more than my monthly rent used to. Gustavo held my chair, took his own seat across from me, jacket still buttoned. Even here, in private, he wore his authority like armor. You didn't have to do this, I said. I wanted to. He poured wine with the same precision he brought to everything measured, deliberate. You won today. That deserves acknowledgement. We won. No. His gaze held mine. You chose to fight. You signed on your terms. I simply made sure the room was arranged in your favor. The waiter appeared with the first course, something delicate and Italian that I couldn't pronounce. Disappeared before I could thank him. Can I ask you something? I said. Yes. The rules you live by. Loyalty, respect, consequences. Elena mentioned them when we first met. What do they actually mean? Gustavo set down his fork, considering. Not deflecting, not softening, just deciding how much truth to offer. Loyalty means I protect what's mine. People, interests, commitments. Once you're inside my circle, you stay there, unless you choose otherwise or betray the terms. And respect? Recognition that everyone has agency. I don't coerce. I don't manipulate through deception. I present options and consequences clearly. He paused. Charles didn't respect you. He controlled through ambiguity and fear. That's not strength. It's cowardice dressed in a suit. The word landed with quiet violence. I took a sip of wine, let it ground me. And consequences? Actions carry weight. If someone harms what I protect, there are outcomes. Always proportional, never arbitrary. His expression remained neutral, but something behind his eyes sharpened. I don't make empty threats, and I don't allow debts, financial or moral, to remain unbalanced. There must be lines you don't cross. 1. He leaned back slightly. No harm to civilians. People outside the world I operate in remain untouched unless they pull themselves into it deliberately, the way Charles did when he threatened you. I processed that. The careful distinction between protection and control, between consequence and cruelty. What happens next? I asked. With us, I mean. That's your choice. He said it simply, without agenda. Public dinners, gallery events, places where we're seen together, or private this. Rooms where the world stays outside. I didn't hesitate. Public. Something flickered in his expression. Not surprise, something closer to approval. Why? Because I'm done hiding, done letting other people's judgments dictate where I go and who I'm seen with. I met his gaze. And because if I'm going to be with someone who carries weight, I want to stand beside him, not behind him. Gustavo's mouth curved into something that might have been a smile if it had been softer. Then public it is. My first day at the gallery was controlled chaos, curators, debating wall placements, interns fielding donor calls, the director simultaneously charming a journalist and berating a delayed shipment. I loved every minute of it, By noon, I had a desk, a key card, and a stack of acquisition proposals to review. By 3, I'd made my first executive decision greenlighting an emerging artist whose work spoke to displacement and rebuilding. At 4, flowers arrived. White roses, not red. No card, but I knew. Nina from the clinic texted, "Told you. Secret admirer with taste." I smiled and got back to work. The fundraiser was Friday. Black tie, champagne, wealthy patrons writing checks for art they'd never hang in their own homes. I'd helped coordinate, learn names, memorize talking points about community access and educational programming. Thursday night, I called Gustavo. "The gallery fundraiser," I said. "Tomorrow at 7. Would you come?" A pause. Then, "You're sure?" "Yes. But it's my ground. My work. You stand at the edge unless I ask you closer." "Understood." His voice carried something I couldn't quite name. Pride, maybe. "I'll be the man in the black suit trying not to look dangerous at a charity event." "You'll fail at that." "Probably." Friday arrived clear and bright. I wore midnight blue, hair up, the diamond earrings my grandmother left me. Felt like myself for the first time in years, not borrowed courage, earned confidence. The gallery filled quickly. Donors, artists, board members circulating with practiced charm. I gave a brief talk about upcoming exhibitions, fielded questions about accessibility initiatives, and felt Gustavo's presence before I saw him. He stood near the sculpture garden entrance, black suit and open collar, watching me work the room with the same focus he'd given to everything else. I caught his eye, smiled. He nodded once, staying exactly where he'd promised at the edge, unless I asked him closer. At 8:30, shouting erupted outside. "Fucking criminals running this city." Charles's voice, slurred and too loud. Through the glass doors, I saw him stumbling on the sidewalk, security already moving to intercept. Mafia whore and her. The director moved to handle it. I put a hand on her arm. "I'll take care of this." Gustavo was already moving toward the door, but I shook my head. "Let me." He stopped, waited. I walked outside into the cooling evening air. Charles stood on the gallery steps, shirt untucked, eyes unfocused. Security had him by both arms, not rough, just immovable. "Hello, Charles," I said calmly. His gaze swung to me, sharpened with alcohol and rage. "You ruined my life." "No," I corrected. "I saved mine." He lunged forward. Security tightened their grip. Behind me, the gallery door opened. Gustavo's voice, quiet and absolute. "Kayla, your call." Charles froze, finally registering the man in the doorway. I had a choice: walk away, let security handle it, or finish what started in a chandelier-lit lounge months ago. I chose the third option. I descended the gallery steps slowly, each footfall deliberate. Charles tracked my movement with bloodshot eyes, his breath coming hard and fast, whiskey fumes cutting through the evening air. "You signed a legal document," I said, my voice level and surgical. "You transferred liability back to yourself. You agreed to cease all contact. You're done, Charles." "Done?" He laughed, sharp and bitter. "You think paperwork ends this? You think your criminal boyfriend scares me? I think you're scared of yourself." I stopped 3 feet away, just beyond his reach. "Scared that without someone to blame, you'll have to look at what you actually are. A man who cages people because he can't build anything real." His face twisted. "I gave you everything. You took everything. There's a difference." He wrenched against security's grip, managed half a step forward before they caught him. "You self-righteous." He lunged. A suited shadow materialized from the gallery entrance, not Gustavo, one of his men, and caught Charles's wrist mid-swing. The movement was economical, professional. Charles's momentum stopped like he'd hit a wall. I glanced back. Gustavo stood in the doorway, utterly still, hands loose at his sides, watching, waiting, letting me decide what happened next. Not rescuing, not intervening, just present. "You're making a scene," I said quietly to Charles. "At a non-profit fundraiser, in front of witnesses and security cameras." Charles's eyes darted to the cameras mounted above the entrance. Reality filtered through the alcohol haze. "I could let this go," I continued. "Walk back inside, let security escort you off the property, pretend this didn't happen." I paused. "Or I could press charges for public disturbance, attempted assault, and violation of the no-contact agreement you signed." "You wouldn't." "I would." I pulled out my phone. "Because you taught me something useful, Charles. Documentation matters, consequences matter, and I'm done letting you write the ending." I called the police. 20 minutes later, Charles sat in the back of a patrol car, still shouting muffled threats through closed windows. The officers took my statement, reviewed security footage, and assured me a report would be filed within 24 hours. The director hovered nearby, concerned and apologetic. "Kayla, if you need to leave early." "I don't." I straightened my dress, felt the tremor in my hands, and breathed through it. "I have donors to thank and an exhibition to finalize." She studied me for a moment, then nodded. "You're going to be excellent at this job." By 10, the gallery had emptied. Caterers cleared glasses and linens, their movements efficient and quiet. I stood in the main exhibition space, surrounded by art that spoke to resilience and transformation, and felt the weight of the evening settle into my bones. "You handled that well." Gustavo's voice came from behind me, low and unhurried. I turned. He'd removed his jacket, draped it over one arm, shirt sleeves still buttoned at the wrists. Even relaxed, he looked like he could dismantle a room with a glance. "I didn't know if I could," I admitted. "I did." He closed the distance between us, stopped just inside my orbit. "You've been capable the entire time. You just needed to remember." Silence stretched between us, comfortable now, weighted with things we hadn't yet named. "Dance with me," he said quietly. "One dance. No audience." I looked around. The gallery was empty, except for a caterer packing glassware in the back room. City lights filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting geometric shadows across the polished concrete floor. "There's no music," I said. "There was no music the first time either. Just your courage and my curiosity about what you'd do with an opportunity." He offered his hand palm up, an invitation without pressure. I took it. He pulled me close, one hand settling at my back, the other cradling my fingers against his chest. We moved through a slow rotation, no rhythm but our breathing, no audience but shadows and art. "That first night," Gustavo said after a moment, "when you left in the rideshare, I noticed the car following." "Escorting," he corrected. "I don't let what interests me walk unguarded in a hostile city, especially not when she's just made an enemy feel small in public." I pulled back slightly to look at him. "You had me followed to make sure I got home safe?" "Yes." "Not to monitor me?" "No." His expression was serious, open in a way I hadn't seen before. "Protection, Kayla, not control. There's a line between them I don't cross." Something in my chest unlocked, not the quick release of fear, but the slow opening of a door I'd kept bolted since Charles left. "Why me?" I asked. "That night at the Bellagio house you could have said no. You asked like someone who'd forgotten she was allowed to." His thumb traced a small circle against my spine. "And when you looked at me, you weren't afraid of what I was. You were angry at what he'd made you. I respect anger more than fear." We turned through another rotation. The city hummed beyond the windows, alive with people choosing their own consequences, writing their own endings. My phone buzzed in my clutch, still abandoned on a nearby bench. I ignored it. It buzzed again, insistent. "Check it," Gustavo said. I retrieved it reluctantly, expecting another crisis. Instead, a news alert. "Breaking. Former loan officer indicted on federal fraud charges, kickback scheme under investigation. The banker. Charles's inside contact. The man who'd bypassed standard verification because Charles bought him scotch and promises. Consequences, cresting like a wave." I looked up at Gustavo. He hadn't moved, but something in his expression suggested he'd known this was coming, had perhaps ensured it arrived on schedule. "You said you don't make problems disappear," I said slowly. "You make consequences arrive." "Yes." "How many more are coming for Charles?" "As many as he earned." The certainty in his voice should have troubled me. Instead, it felt like solid ground after months of shifting sand. I slipped my phone back into my clutch, returned to his arms. "Then let's finish this dance." We moved through the empty gallery, past paintings of women reclaiming space, sculptures of broken things made whole. Outside, the city glittered with 1,000 stories being written in real time. Ours was just beginning. 1 year later, the chandeliers at the Bellagio house had been dimmed to gold, their light softer now, less like witnesses and more like old friends keeping secrets. The lounge was empty, rented private for the evening, mahogany and glass, reflecting only silence and possibility. I stood at the entrance in crimson again. Not the borrowed courage dress from a year ago, but something new, chosen. A shade deeper, cut sharper, fitted to a woman who'd learned the difference between being seen and being scrutinized. My grandmother's diamond earrings caught the light, and for the first time in years, I looked at my reflection in the mirrored bar and recognized myself completely. Gustavo waited at the center of the parquet floor, black suit and open collar, the ink at his throat visible in the low light. His hands were loose at his sides, but his attention was absolute, the same focused presence he'd brought to everything over the past year. Dinners where he learned my rhythms. Gallery events where he stood at the edge until I called him closer. Quiet mornings in his apartment, coffee and newspapers, his world and mine learning to overlap without erasing each other's borders. He smiled when he saw me. Not the sharp, measured expression I'd first encountered, but something warmer. Still controlled, still Gustavo, but softened at the edges by a year of choosing each other daily. "You're early," I said, crossing to him. "I'm exactly on time." He glanced at his watch, the heavy silver one I'd first noticed when he offered his hand and changed my life. "You're the one who's been ready for an hour." "How did you—" "Nina texted me. Said you'd changed 3 times and were driving yourself crazy." I laughed. Traitor. Loyal friend who knows when to intervene. He extended his hand, palm up. "Please dance with me." The echo of my desperate request a year ago landed with deliberate weight, but this time, the words carried no panic, no audience to perform for, just an invitation between equals. I took his hand. He pulled me close, and we moved through a slow rotation, the empty lounge folding around us like a parenthesis. No music played, but we'd never needed it. Just breath and heartbeat, the language we'd learned to speak fluently. "I have something for you," Gustavo said after the second turn. "If it's another anonymous breakfast delivery, it's not." He stopped dancing, reached into his jacket pocket, and withdrew a small black box and a folded document. My heart kicked against my ribs. "I don't do softness," he said, holding my gaze. "I don't make promises I can't enforce or offer certainty I haven't verified. So I'm not going to tell you I'll love you forever, because forever is a concept, not a contract. Gustavo, I'm going to tell you this instead." He opened the box. The ring inside was platinum and emerald, geometric and clean, nothing borrowed or expected. "I want partnership, separate finances so you never feel caged, joint choices on everything that affects both of us, shared rules, loyalty, respect, consequences applied equally." He unfolded the document. A contract, because of course it was. Typed, notarized, with spaces for both our signatures. "I don't want to rescue you," he continued, his voice steady and sure. "I want to build something with you. A life where power doesn't compress you, it expands around you. Where you choose every day, and I choose you back." He knelt. Not a traditional pose. Gustavo Bellucci didn't kneel traditionally, but a deliberate lowering that put us at eye level, that made this a question between equals rather than a petition from below. "Marry me, Kayla, on your terms." I looked at the ring. At the contract, 5 pages of precisely worded clauses about autonomy and partnership, financial independence and shared decision-making. At the man who'd spent a year learning that protection and control weren't synonyms. "I don't want rescuing," I said, echoing his words back to him. "I want partnership. Then you'll have it." He slid the ring onto my finger, perfect fit, because he'd asked Nina for my size weeks ago, and Nina was terrible at keeping secrets that led to joy. I pulled him to his feet and kissed him there under the dimmed chandeliers, in the lounge where I'd once asked a dangerous stranger to help me pretend I was brave. "Yes," I said against his mouth. "On my terms, with your pen." He smiled wide and genuine, the expression I'd learned to earn through a year of daily choices. "Sign first, then we dance." We signed at the bar, the contract spread between bottles that no longer looked like stained glass saints. Just glass. Beautiful and functional, and exactly what they were. Gustavo signed as groom. I signed as bride. Elena would notarize it Monday and laugh at us for turning a proposal into paperwork. Then we returned to the floor and danced. No music, no witnesses, just 2 figures turning under chandeliers that had once felt like judgment and now felt like celebration. In the mirror behind the bar, I caught our reflection, his hand at my back, my head on his shoulder, both of us choosing this exact moment in a city full of other choices. The glass held no ghosts now, no shame, no man nursing whiskey and superiority. Just us. Power no longer compressed me. It expanded around me like light through crystal, refracting into 1,000 possible futures where I walked unguarded not because I was defenseless, but because I'd learned to choose my own guards, where consequences arrived on schedule, where debt was never a cage, where a single desperate dance request became the first line of a story we'd spend the rest of our lives writing in our own words, on our own terms, with ink that wouldn't fade. Gustavo turned me once more under the chandeliers, and I realized something fundamental had shifted. The room hadn't changed. The light was the same. The mahogany and glass and parquet floor remained exactly as they'd been a year ago. But I had bent differently, and the room had learned to bend around me. "Ready to go home?" Gustavo asked quietly. I smiled against his shoulder. "I'm already there." We danced until the chandeliers dimmed further, until the city beyond the windows went from gold to indigo, until the only sound was our breathing, and the distant hum of a world that would keep turning with or without our permission. But tonight, it turned with us. By choice. By consequence. By the fierce, ungovernable algebra of two people who'd learned that power shared becomes something bigger than power held. We left the Bellagio house hand in hand, a contract in my clutch and a ring on my finger, walking into a future we'd built word by word, choice by choice, dance by dance. The chandeliers dimmed behind us. The witnesses, if they'd ever existed, had nothing left to report. Just this: a woman who'd learned to ask for what she needed, and a man who'd learned that the strongest walls are the ones you build around someone's freedom, not their fear. The rest was epilogue, and we'd write it together.